Life has been full of challenges and some small wins. Losing my parents when I was young hit me hard, like a pain that never truly goes away. But I was lucky when the elderly couple next door, the Parkers, took me in. They were the kindest people you could ever meet. They treated me more like their granddaughter than someone they were helping. We didn't have a lot of money, but we were rich in love, and that was all that mattered. Just as I was turning 19 and thinking about college, the Parkers died in a car accident. Suddenly, I was on my own again. They left me a small amount of money for school and their house in the suburbs. It was a warm, cozy home filled with memories, but it had too many reminders of the past for me. So, I sold it and bought a small apartment in the city close to the college where I had enrolled to study financial management. It felt good to have a plan and be moving forward. The classes were tough, but interesting, and I worked hard to learn everything I could about numbers and markets. After college, I got a decent job. My days were filled with work, and I was doing okay, but the nights felt different. Even though the city was full of people, it felt strangely lonely. That's when I met Peter at a friend's party. He was loud, funny, and didn't care who noticed. His energy was contagious, and we clicked from the moment he bumped into me and spilled my drink. "Hey, watch it!" I snapped, more surprised than upset. "My bad. Let me make it up to you. What were you drinking?" Peter grinned without a hint of guilt. "Just beer," I said, trying not to smile too much. 2 beers coming right up. He shouted over the music, heading to the makeshift bar. That was Peter. Simple, straightforward, and no drama. We spent the entire night talking about everything and nothing. We both loved old movies and hated sushi. Talking to him was easy, and by the time the party ended, I didn't want to say goodbye. 2 years later, he proposed. There were no grand gestures, just the two of us watching TV when he pulled a ring out of his pocket. "Marry me," he said, holding on to the ring tightly. I thought he might crush the ring. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was just so us. Perfectly imperfect. "Yes, of course, you big goof," I said. Getting married didn't change much at first. We were still the same people, just now officially tied together, which felt right. We settled into life in my small city apartment, still close to the busy streets, but now with someone to share the quiet moments. Life felt fuller, and for the first time in a long while, the nights didn't feel so lonely. Being married brought a sense of comfort, but life has a way of keeping you on your toes. Jack's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Scott, were wonderful people. They lived in a cozy suburban home and welcomed me into their family from the start. I could see where Jack got his easygoing nature. Their warmth was a balm for my heart, which still ached from losing my own family. "We're so happy you're part of our family now," Mrs. Scott would often say, squeezing my hand with such kindness that it was both comforting and a little overwhelming. "Thank you. I really appreciate how welcoming you've been," I would reply, feeling genuinely grateful. Visiting them became our weekend routine. Those days were filled with backyard barbecues and long chats over coffee. Life was good, simple, and honest. But then everything changed. Jack was called away for a long business trip. He would be gone for a whole year. It was a fantastic opportunity for his career, but the timing couldn't have been worse. Just after Jack left, Mr. and Mrs. Scott's health started to decline, and it happened fast. One day, Mrs. Scott called me, her voice filled with worry. "Laura, I hate to ask, but I could really use your help. Mr. Scott is not doing well," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Without thinking twice, I packed a bag and headed to the suburbs. Seeing Mr. and Mrs. Scott so frail shook me. Mr. Scott, who had always been strong and steady, now looked so small, connected to tubes and machines. I quickly settled into helping around the house, cooking, cleaning, and doing whatever needed to be done, while Mrs. Scott focused on caring for her husband. In the evenings, I would sit with them reading aloud from Mr. Scott's favorite books. He would often close his eyes before I finished a chapter. "Thank you, Laura," he'd whisper on the good days, his voice just a shadow of what it used to be. "It's my pleasure, really," I'd say, gently squeezing his hand. trying to offer comfort in the little ways I could. One quiet afternoon, while I was chopping vegetables for dinner, Mrs. Scott sat down at the kitchen table. She looked older than usual, the weight of everything clearly wearing on her. "Laura, I don't know how to say this, but we're in a bit of a tough spot," she started, nervously, wringing her hands. Mr. Scott had always been the one providing for their household, and with him in such poor health, Mrs. Scott was clearly stressed. I put down the knife, giving her my full attention. "We're struggling, honey. I hate to even ask, but would you consider renting out your apartment? It might help us get through this rough patch," she said, looking down, clearly embarrassed. I didn't hesitate for a second. "Of course, Mrs. Scott. I'll take care of it right away," I replied firmly, wanting to ease her burden as much as I could. The apartment rented out quickly, and every month I made sure to send the rental money to Mrs. Scott along with enough to cover groceries and bills. It wasn't easy. The commute to my job in the city was a nightmare, but I kept telling myself that family sticks together no matter what. "You're a godsend, Laura," Mrs. Scott would say, her relief obvious every time I handed her the money. "It's what family does," I'd respond, though there were nights when I lay in the guest room, listening to the distant sounds of the city, feeling like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. Jack's phone calls were my lifeline. Even though the connection was often bad, hearing his voice kept me going. "How's it going, Joyce? Are you holding up okay?" His concern was always clear, even through the static of a long-distance call. "We're managing. Don't worry about us," I'd say, trying to sound cheerful, not wanting to add to his worries. Life at the Scott's house changed drastically when Lauren, Mrs. Scott's daughter from her first marriage, showed up out of the blue. The whole atmosphere shifted the moment she arrived. She had a presence that felt like a cold wind sneaking in under the door. I didn't know Lauren very well, but Jack had mentioned her a few times, and I had seen enough during her brief, tense visits to know that her relationship with Mr. and Mrs. Scott was strained. My days were already long, juggling work and caring for Mr. and Mrs. Scott. Mr. Scott was better than and getting worse, and Lauren's arrival only added more stress. She moved in like she owned the place, making herself at home without a second thought. One evening, after an especially hard day, Mr. Scott motioned for me to come closer. His voice was weak, a strained whisper. "Aura, you need to watch out for Lauren. She's not a good person," he said, his words making my stomach knot with worry. "I understand, Mr. Scott. I'll be careful," I promised, though I wasn't exactly sure what I was supposed to be careful about. Mr. Scott's warning didn't take long to make sense. Lauren quickly made her intentions clear. One morning, I found her in the kitchen, her presence dark and cold like a storm cloud. "Just so we're clear," she said, her tone sharp, "I'm not here to play maid or cook for anyone." She sipped her coffee, eyeing me like I was in her way. I felt like an outsider in her mother's kitchen. Lauren's presence made it clear that I was not welcome, but I tried to stay calm. "Okay, Lauren, I've been taking care of things so far, and I can keep doing it," I said, hoping to keep the peace. "Good, because I don't plan on lifting a finger. This is Mom's house after all," she snapped back, her eyes daring me to say otherwise. From that day on, Lauren made sure everyone felt her presence, and not in a good way. She would order takeout just for herself and her mom, leaving the empty containers on the table for me to clean up. Her attitude wasn't subtle, and it hurt, but I kept quiet because Mr. and Mrs. Scott needed peace. One evening, Mrs. Scott spoke up. "Laura, why don't you sit and eat with us tonight?" There was a rare warmth in her voice, and for a moment, I felt like the old days were back. Before I could answer, Lauren quickly cut in. "Mom, Laura has been busy all day. She probably prefers to eat later." Her words sounded concerned, but the message was clear. I wasn't welcome at the table. The days felt heavier as my chores doubled. Lauren's entitlement filled the house, and she often whispered to her mother at night, likely turning her against me. Mrs. Scott, once kind and understanding, began to change. Her smiles became fewer, her words colder. A couple of weeks later, Mr. Scott passed away. The funeral was a somber event with Jack flying in just in time to say goodbye. It was the first time we had been together in months, and having him by my side brought a sense of relief. But even amidst the mourning, I noticed a shift in the air at the Scott home. Lauren was on her best behavior, acting polite to everyone with a forced smile. "How's everything been while I've been gone, Jack?" asked me quietly when we had a moment alone after the service. "Fine. Everything's been fine," I lied, forcing a smile. I didn't want to add to his grief by telling him about the tension in the house. "Are you sure? You look a bit worn out," he said, his brow furrowed with concern. "It's just been busy, helping out here," I reassured him, avoiding his eyes. This wasn't the time to unload everything that had been happening. As soon as Jack left, Lauren upped the act. The mask of the caring sister was gone, replaced by her usual sneering attitude. The dynamic in the house changed completely. Mrs. Scott, perhaps consumed by her own grief, grew distant and cold toward me. She stopped having conversations with me, only giving commands, and I felt more like a stranger than a part of the family. Lauren took over the house as if she owned it, acting like the lady of the manor. Her reign was marked by complete disregard for anyone's feelings but her own. She started barging into my room without knocking, rummaging through my belongings like she was searching for something valuable. One afternoon, I found her in my room again, and I knew things were only going to get worse. I was out in the garden trying to find some peace when I noticed a box lying among the shrubs. Curious, I opened it and felt my heart sink. Inside were my watches, jewelry, and even some of my underwear. Nearby, several of my dresses were carelessly thrown over a bush. Fury rose inside me as I grabbed my belongings, clutching the box tightly. I stormed inside and found Lauren lounging in the living room, acting like she owned the place. "What the hell, Lawrence?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. "You can't just throw my stuff out." Lauren laughed, a cold, harsh sound that echoed through the room. "Live here, please. You're just a guest and not a welcome one. You should be out in the garden, or better yet, on the street. You're nothing but a useless beggar anyway," she sneered. Her words stung deeply, like pouring salt on a wound. Trembling, I turned to Mrs. Scott, who had just walked into the room. "Mrs. Scott, please tell her she can't treat me like this. This is supposed to be my home, too," I pleaded, my voice breaking. But Mrs. Scott, once so kind and gentle, looked right through me as if I didn't exist. "This is Lauren's house now," she said coldly. "She's right, Laura. Maybe it's time you found somewhere else to live." Her words hit me like a punch in the gut. I stood there clutching the box, my heart breaking. The home I had come to know, the family I thought I had, was falling apart in front of me. Despite everything, I stayed because of a promise I had made to Mr. Scott on his deathbed to look after his wife and not let Lauren take control. But day by day, Miss Scott started to become more like Lauren. Her once gentle words turned sharp and her eyes grew colder. One evening, as I cleaned up after dinner, she snapped at me. "You're just sitting around doing nothing, aren't you?" "I'm doing my best to keep things running smoothly," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite how much her words hurt. "Your best," she scoffed. "Could have fooled me. Looks like you're just freeloading." She turned her back on me and walked away, leaving me standing there feeling crushed. I was far from a freeloader. I had rented out my apartment and sent nearly all of the income to Mrs. Scott, and I was handling most of the housework while Lauren did nothing but criticize. Lauren, living off her mother's pension, was relentless. "What does my brother even see in you?" She would taunt me at night, her voice loud enough to echo through the thin walls. I would bite my tongue, swallow my anger and frustration, and remind myself of the promise I had made to Mr. Scott. The atmosphere in the house had become unbearable, filled with tension and hostility. One evening, I came home early from work and overheard a conversation that turned my world upside down. I walked in quietly, unnoticed by Lauren and Mrs. Scott, who were in the middle of a heated discussion in the living room. "We need to get her to sell that apartment of hers. You know how much we could use that money," Lauren said, her voice greedy and calculating. "Yes, but how do we convince her?" "Laura isn't stupid. She won't just hand it over," Mrs. Scott replied, sounding both frustrated and greedy. "Leave it to me, Mom. I'll sweet-talk her into it. Once she signs it over, we can finally live the way we deserve." Lauren's words slithered through the air like a snake. Hearing them plot to take away my only financial security hit me like a punch to the gut. Fear gripped me. I knew in that moment I couldn't stay any longer, my heart racing. I slipped away to my room unnoticed. They were planning to rob me of everything, and I had to leave before they could succeed. I made up my mind right then and there. Every second in that house now felt like a countdown to disaster. With shaking hands, I quickly packed my essentials. I didn't bother with goodbyes. They didn't deserve them. Slipping out the back door, I ordered a taxi to take me to the train station. As I sat on the train, doubts swirled in my mind. Would Jack understand? Would he take their side? The uncertainty was crushing, but the fear of what might happen if I stayed was worse. I stared out the window, watching the landscape blur by, a mix of fear and determination settling in my chest. When I arrived at Jack's place, his reaction was a mix of shock, relief, and concern. His eyes widened as he opened the door, seeing me standing there with a bag in hand, probably looking as frazzled as I felt. "Laura, what are you doing here? Is everything okay?" he asked, stepping aside to let me in. I hesitated for a moment, taking in the familiar and comforting sight of his temporary home. "No, Jack, everything's not okay. Not at all," I replied, my voice trembling. He led me to the couch, his face now full of worry. "Talk to me, babe. What happened?" he urged gently. I told him everything. I explained how things had gotten first since Lauren came back, how the situation at home had become unbearable, and how they were plotting to manipulate me into selling my apartment. I hadn't wanted to worry him while he was away working, but now there was no hiding it. As I spoke, Jack's face grew darker with every word I said. As I finished speaking, Jack's fists were clenched and his jaw was tight with anger. "Why didn't you tell me any of this before?" he asked, his voice full of both concern and frustration. "I didn't want to cause more trouble. I thought I could handle it," I admitted, feeling foolish now. "Laura, damn it. You shouldn't have to handle something like that on your own," he burst out, standing up and pacing the room. "I can't believe my mom and Lauren would treat you this way." He stopped and looked at me, his eyes intense. "I'm not letting anyone treat my wife like that. No way." Without hesitation, he grabbed his phone. My heart raced as I watched him dial his mother. The phone barely rang twice before she answered. I couldn't hear her side of the conversation, but the way Jack's shoulders tensed told me enough. "Mom, this has to stop. I know everything and I won't tolerate it. If Lauren doesn't leave, and if you don't start treating Laura with respect, we're done. No more help, no more money, nothing." Jack's voice was firm, leaving no room for debate. There was a fiery exchange and then silence. Jack gripped the phone tightly before speaking again. "Fine. If that's your choice, then you've made mine." He hung up and turned to me, his expression softening. "Looks like it's just us now, babe. But that's all we need," he said, pulling me into his arms. I leaned into him, feeling safe and supported. "Just us," I murmured, feeling the truth in his words. We were on our own now, but somehow that felt okay. Jack and I stayed up late talking about everything. How we would manage without supporting his mom and Lauren, how I could arrange remote work, and what our plans would look like going forward. It felt like we were building a new life, just the two of us. Whatever happens, we're in this together. You and me against the world, right? Jack said with a determined smile. "Right?" I replied, smiling back, feeling more confident with him by my side. The next few days were busy. I arranged with my job to work remotely, which thankfully they agreed to. Jack, helped me move my things out of storage, and we set up a little home office in the corner of his living room. It wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful, and it was ours. About a week into our new routine, I received a phone call that felt like a ghost from the past. It was Mrs. Scott. Her voice, once so sweet to me, now sounded harsh, filled with desperation and entitlement. "Laura, why haven't I received the money for this month? You know we depend on it," she demanded right away, her tone sharp and accusing. For a moment, I was stunned silent by her nerve. It was unbelievable. "I'm sorry, but after everything, you still expect me to support you?" I asked, my voice more surprised than angry. In the background, I could hear Lauren's voice, sharp and angry. "She's just ungrateful. Make her transfer the money." I took a deep breath to calm the anger rising inside me. Their cruel words replayed in my mind, words that had cut deep. "Mrs. Scott, Lauren called me a ruthless beggar, remember? I'm not sending money to people who treat me like that. I'm done." There was silence on the other end, and I could almost imagine Mrs. Scott's shocked expression. "But we're family," she finally said, her voice a mix of anger and desperation. "No, family doesn't treat each other that way." "Goodbye, Mrs. Scott," I said firmly, and hung up before she could reply. The call left me shaken, but Jack was right there, his support solid as ever. "You did the right thing, Laura. It's time they learned to stand on their own," he reassured me, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. Not long after settling back into our hometown, another surprise came our way. I was pregnant. The news brought us joy we hadn't expected, and suddenly the future felt bright and full of possibilities. We decided it was time to sell my apartment and buy a small house in the suburbs, somewhere close to a good school where our child could grow up. As we were planning the move, another call came, this time from Mrs. Scott. Her voice sounded different, desperate, almost pitiful. "Laura, I've made a mistake. Lauren forced me to sell the house, took the money, and left me with nothing. Could I come and live with you and Jack?" she asked, her voice shaky, pleading for help. This was a test of my resolve. "Mrs. Scott, you chose this path. When you sided with Lauren against us, you could have made a different choice," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the turmoil I felt inside. I know I've made mistakes, but you have a kind heart. Can't you forgive an old woman for her poor choices?" she begged. I sighed, feeling a twinge of pity, but also remembering all the hurt her actions had caused. "I forgave you a long time ago, but that doesn't mean I can let you back into my life. You need to live with the consequences of your actions, just like I have." I replied and ended the call. With a firm decision, I blocked her number. We continued with our plans and bought a charming little house with a garden, a place where our child could play and grow. One lazy Thursday morning, as I was flipping through the newspaper with my coffee, a headline caught my eye: "Local woman arrested for massive fraud scheme." I stared at the photo in disbelief. There was Lauren, handcuffed, looking completely defeated. I felt a mix of shock and, if I'm honest, a little sense of justice when I saw the news. "Jack, look at this," I called, holding up the newspaper for him to see. "It's Lauren. She's been arrested for fraud." Jack took the paper and scanned the article with a serious expression. "Wow. I can't say I'm surprised, but still, it's a lot to take in." "Yeah, it is." I agreed, but she made her choices, and now she's facing the consequences. As I said, I realized it gave me a sense of closure I didn't know I needed. Eventually, we heard through friends that Mrs. Scott was living in a small apartment, working 2 jobs just to get by. Her pension wasn't enough to cover her living expenses, and the debt Lauren had left behind. "Did you hear about your mom?" One of Jack's friends, Frank, asked one evening when he and his wife came over for a backyard barbecue. "Yeah, I heard," Jack said while flipping burgers on the grill. His voice held a touch of sadness, but also a sense of finality. "She chose her path." "Frank, it's tough, but that's how it is." Frank nodded, understanding there was no more to say. "You're right, man. Just thought you should know." The conversation moved on after that, drifting to lighter topics like sports and work. Life had moved forward, and so had we. The real joy of our new life became clear when Kelly was born. Becoming parents changed everything. It shifted our priorities, our dreams, and even healed some of the old wounds by filling them with new love. Can you believe she's ours? I whispered to Jack one night as we stood by Kelly's crib, watching her sleep peacefully. She's perfect, Laura. Just perfect, Jack murmured, his voice thick with emotion. We spent our days marveling at every little milestone Kelly reached. Each smile, each giggle. She was our little miracle, and with her the struggles of the past began to fade, making space for new, happier memories. Each day was simple, filled with small moments of joy that slowly created the beautiful story of our happy family life. I have a new girlfriend, and I'm going to live with her. I'm divorcing you, and you need to go to your parents. I don't understand what you're saying. I don't need you anymore. You can stay with my parents if you want to be a breadwinner or a housekeeper. Julianne, you understand. My in-laws and my husband laugh at me. They are the worst kind of people. But for me, it's better this way. So you all need to leave. My name is Julianne, and I am a 35-year-old office worker. I have spent my whole life working. After graduating from college, I started working for a major company. For about 13 years, I worked hard and earned qualifications for promotions. Thanks to that, I am now a department manager at a young age. I am blessed with a boss who always has something useful to say and a team of highly motivated and talented subordinates. My work life was very fulfilling, but my personal life was not at all. I had a boyfriend once when I was a student, but none since I started working. Worried about my situation, a friend of mine hosted a dinner party for me. That is where I met Jake. He was kind, had a nice smile, and seemed very personable. Since he was the same age as me, we had a lot in common and enjoyed talking to each other. We soon became friends, exchanged contact information, and started going out to eat alone together. Then he confessed his feelings for me, and we started dating. We got along well. He proposed to me, and we ended up getting married. I was so happy to be married to the man I loved so much. Soon after, I went to his parents' house to meet them. His parents were very kind and welcomed me with open arms. Julian, it's nice to meet you. I can't believe such a beautiful person became Jake's bride, they cried. I am so proud of my son for bringing a good woman here. Hey, Mom and Dad, stop it. Julianne is getting scared. Oh my. If you really think so, you can say it. That's right. It's a compliment. So, it's okay. His parents were very friendly and easy to talk to, just like him. Julianne works for a major company, doesn't she? Oh, that's great. It's cool to be a woman who can work hard. Will you quit your job when you get married? No, I'm going to keep working. Well, you've got a good job at a good company. That's better. I was relieved. According to my friends, their mothers-in-law often told them to quit their job, saying it was a wife's job to support her husband, so I was glad. I thought to myself that my future mother-in-law was generous. After greeting my parents, we got married. My heart was filled with excitement for the new married life that was about to begin. My husband moved into the house I was living in, and we started our new life together. I was very happy to be newlyweds with my husband whom I loved very much. I was happy to be at home with him all the time, and to have him home when I came back from work. 8 months into our life together, my husband said he had something he wanted to discuss with me. If you don't mind, I'd like you to live with my father and mother. What do you mean live together? Yes, they are getting old, and I am worried about many things. I see. I can certainly understand how my husband feels. My parents are about the same age as my husband's parents, but my brother and his wife are currently living with them, so I have nothing to worry about. However, my husband is an only child, so it is understandable that he is concerned about his parents. Does this mean we are living with my in-laws? Yes, it would. But do they have a room available for us? They use every room for some reason or another. About that, if you like, I think it would be a good idea to renovate my parents' house and make it a two-family house. Two families. Yes, if we do that, it will be much cheaper than buying a new house. We can live in a beautiful and spacious house while still maintaining our privacy, right? I see. I thought it was an attractive idea. My in-laws are kind people, and if we live in two houses, it won't be as stressful. Yes, that's fine. Really? Thank you. My mom and dad will be so happy. I was happy to see my husband so happy. Later, my in-laws came to visit us, and both of them were very grateful. I even thought that with such a kind and cheerful family, I wouldn't mind not having two households. Soon after, my husband and I discussed remodeling my in-laws' house. The cost would be around $200,000. As we were discussing it, my husband made a surprising remark. Actually, I have a favor to ask you. Can you pay for the remodeling? What do you mean the full amount? Yes. Why? My husband looked very uncomfortable. Actually, we are in debt. I was shocked. Neither my husband nor my in-laws had ever mentioned this when we were dating or when we got married. How much debt do they have? About $250,000. What? I thought it would be a few tens of thousands of dollars, but I was surprised at the amount. I ended up shouting out loud. It wasn't so bad at first, but it gradually grew. Even if I tried to pay it back, I couldn't. My parents are already living on a pension, and the debt is getting bigger and bigger. I see. I couldn't hide my surprise and upset at the sudden revelation. I had no idea that my in-laws owed such a large sum of money. Julianne, I need a favor. Will you help me pay off my father and father-in-law debt? They can't afford it anymore, and I don't make a very good salary either. Then isn't it going to be tough to renovate the house and live together as two families? No, that's important. So, let's go ahead as planned. You have asked me to pay for the remodeling and your father's debt. I'm on the hook for $250,000. I know I'm talking about difficult things, but I want to take care of my life with you, Julianne, and I want to protect my mom and dad. It's because I love both my parents and you. I'm sorry I'm being greedy, but if you really love me, please help me. I'll pay you back little by little. I was very upset. My husband and my in-laws had no one to turn to but me. I knew my husband really loved me, but I felt deceived by his words. Love is blind, I thought. Okay, I'll pay for it. I agreed. My husband said, "Thank you so much," and shook my hand. And he told my in-laws, and later they came to our house to apologize. My mother-in-law even cried tears of joy. I have to do my best from now on. I thought I had to take over my in-laws' debt and was determined to do it. Although I had some savings, I was afraid to pay it all at once. So, I decided to pay $60,000 for my savings and then the rest in installments. My in-laws joined us to discuss the repayment. I explained my plan for installments, and they said I could do whatever I wanted. Why don't you transfer the money directly to the account for debt repayment? We're not very good at managing money, and I'm a little afraid to transfer a lot of money, my husband said. My in-laws nodded. It would be time-consuming for me to transfer the money to my in-laws' account, and then for them to transfer it to their repayment account. Since it was a large sum, I didn't want the money to get lost in the process. So, I agreed to transfer it directly. Once the conversation was settled, my in-laws looked very relieved. Now, we don't have to be afraid of the monthly debt collection. It's been really scary. Dad and Mom, you should thank Julianne properly. Well, I can't tell you how many times I thanked you. I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much. I'm so glad Julianne became his wife. No. I said I was happy that my in-laws were happy. However, I felt a little uncomfortable because I thought they might see me as just a money source. Even though I felt a bit bad, I wanted to take care of my beloved husband's family. With that in mind, I began to make the payments and we remodeled our house, making it a two-family home. We started living together in a beautiful and spacious house. My in-laws were very happy, and my husband's eyes lit up at the new house. I enjoyed cooking in the new kitchen and was glad we did the remodeling. It was more convenient and closer to work, which shortened my commute and gave me more free time. I could use that time to study. I worked hard every day to pay off the debt. However, something bothered me. My husband did not help pay off the debt at all. When I told him about my in-laws' debt, he said he would help, but he never paid anything from his own paycheck. When I asked him about it, he said his salary was not enough. I asked to see his pay stubs, but he refused, so I didn't know how much he earned. I worked hard for about a year to pay off the debt. One day, my in-laws asked how much money was left to repay. If it's been a year, you haven't paid back that much, right? Well, we've paid back about $60,000 this year, so the remainder is roughly $180,000. My in-laws were extremely surprised. What? You pay back that much, Julianne? That's amazing. At this pace, you'll finish paying off the loan in about 5 years. If I work hard, I'll be able to pay it off, I replied. Thank you so much, my in-laws said, crying and happy. Seeing them so happy made all the hard work worth it. A few days later, I faced an unexpected situation. I had to work overtime, so I told my husband I would be home late. However, the work went smoothly and we finished on time. I hurried home, planning to cook dinner for my husband. When I opened the front door, I saw my in-laws' shoes. Oh, my in-laws are here, I thought. I walked toward the living room and heard my in-laws and my husband talking. You were right to marry that woman, weren't you, Jake? You did great. I can't believe you got a woman with that much money. When I heard she works for a big company, I was really careful and seduced her. You should be more grateful. You should be more grateful. Oh my, you're one of the people who created that debt. What? But I owe the least. What are you talking about? How much did you spend on horse racing? Your gambling is terrible. I get a jackpot once in a while. So, sometimes we were actually ahead. How can you be ahead when you owe $250,000? But at this rate, we'll be able to get out of debt and get back on track. That's really great. And she even remodeled our house. I got a really good wife. Well, I'm going to dump her after she pays off the debt. My husband and in-laws laughed. I was so shocked I couldn't move from the front door for a while. After calming down a little, I made a loud noise as I closed the lock and said, I'm home from the front door. When I went to the living room, my in-laws and husband greeted me with smiles. Oh, Julian, welcome home. Good job. Good job. Well, we're going back to our room. Let's have dinner together again soon. I was so afraid of their gentle smiles because I had heard their earlier conversation. Seeing my husband pretending to be a good husband with a smile on his face shocked me. I wondered why I had been working so hard to pay them back. Didn't you say you had to work late today? Yeah, but I finished earlier than expected, so I hurried home to cook dinner. I tried my best to act calm until dinner, so my husband wouldn't realize what I had heard. Later, when my husband was taking a bath, I stayed in my room and cried alone. Crying as hard as I could made me want to get back at my husband and in-laws. From then on, I acted quickly. I began to prepare for the divorce and made plans for what to do afterward. About 5 months passed. I pretended to be happy and told my husband that I had paid off my in-laws' debt. My husband's eyes widened. What? You paid off the debt? That $250,000? That was supposed to take roughly 5 years, right? Actually, I have quite a bit of money saved up, but I was afraid to pay it off all at once. So, I started taking out a little bit from my salary and savings, but we were already below $200,000, and I thought it would be better to pay it all off at once. I see, I said. Then I asked, do you mind if I check, and showed my husband the bank book. Oh, it's true $180,000 was paid all at once. My husband tried to hide his excitement, but I could see he was itching to get out of there. Wow, Julianne, thank you. My parents are going to love this. He put his hands on his face, pretending to cry, but I knew it was just an act. Soon after, My in-laws came and thanked me. Thank you so much. I'm so glad I met Julianne. You're like a blessing. If I hadn't known the truth, I would have been happy to hear their thanks. But I knew what they were really like, and I only acted nice because I was ready for my plan. A few days later, my husband asked to speak with me. He looked very serious. What's going on? I asked. I'm sorry, Julianne, but you have to leave me. What do you mean? I acted surprised on purpose. I have a new girlfriend. What? I'm going to live here with her, so I'm divorcing you. You're going to my parents' place. I was shocked by Jake's unexpected statement. I knew from overhearing their earlier conversation that my husband would leave me once the debt was paid, but I didn't expect him to openly declare his infidelity. What did he mean by sending me to his parents' place? I don't really understand what you mean, I said. My husband's mood turned sour. You're not very understanding at all. I don't need you anymore, but as a breadwinner or a housekeeper, I can keep you here. Then the front door opened, and my in-laws came in. Jake, did you finally tell her? Yeah, I told her. I wish I could have been there for that moment. You can come to our house. If you do the chores for us, of course, we'll charge you rent. My in-laws and husband laughed at me. They were the worst people ever. All of you need to leave, I said. My in-laws rolled their eyes at my comment. What are you talking about? Have you forgotten? I can easily pay for the renovation myself. You changed the name of the house to mine, so I have the rights to this house. I could decide who lives here and who has to leave. My in-laws' faces turned pale at my comment. They finally remembered about the house title. I was really dumbfounded. I'm sorry, but you can't live here anymore. If we get divorced, you'll be strangers. My in-laws realized the seriousness of the situation, but my husband, not wanting to be outdone, retorted, But you took over our debt and paid it in full. You're the one losing money. If we had no debt, we could at least afford a new place to live. That's true. Thank you for letting us live in a nice house while you pay our debts. My in-laws and husband said, I'm sorry, but I didn't pay off the rest of the $180,000 debt. What? No, but you had money missing from your bank. That was just a separate account I created and moved money around in. The debt hasn't changed from $180,000. I just haven't had the collections come yet because I've been paying large sums continuously, but it's time for them to come, so you are responsible for paying the rest. My husband and in-laws were shocked. Then I warned them, Jake, you told me you were having an affair, so you should pay alimony. I'll charge your partner for the affair, too. Oh, no. She went out with me because she thought I had money in a house. If I have to pay alimony, she'll dump me. I don't care about that. No, I apologize. Please don't leave us, my husband pleaded. My husband was afraid of being dumped by his lover, and my in-laws were afraid of being left by me. They were truly selfish. I have nothing to do with you people anymore. No matter what you say, I have also put this house on the market. I will also have you pay the $120,000 debt I paid on your behalf through my lawyer. My in-laws froze, stunned by the loss of everything they had. I then demanded a divorce and alimony from my husband through my lawyer. I also demanded alimony from his lover and $120,000 from my in-laws for what I had paid. Actually, that renovated house sold for about $400,000. It was in a good location, and a family looking for a duplex bought it at a good price. I had to pay $320,000, which included the $120,000 debt, and $200,000 for the renovation. However, I ended up gaining $80,000 from selling the house. Additionally, I received alimony from my ex-husband and his affair partner, which greatly improved my financial situation. On top of that, I got a $120,000 payment from my ex-in-law. I ended up benefiting the most from this situation. I believe this is fair because the damage I suffered was significant enough to make me distrust people. Initially, I had savings because I was learning how to invest with the goal of paying off my in-laws' debts as quickly as possible. Since I had substantial savings to begin with, I invested tens of thousands of dollars, and my assets grew significantly in about a year. Additionally, I received a raise at work, so my earnings increased because of my savings and investments. I was able to take such drastic steps. My former in-laws ended up back in debt and lost their house, but they deserved it for deceiving me. People who cheat others should face the consequences. This experience has taught me to be more cautious and develop a better sense of judgment about people. Moving forward, I will continue to save and increase my assets so I can live a comfortable life in my old age. I want to make happy memories with people I can truly trust. For example, I started by focusing on improving my financial knowledge. I took courses and read books about investing and personal finance. This helped me make informed decisions about where to invest my money. Over time, I diversified my investments, spreading them across different asset classes like stocks, bonds, and real estate. This strategy helped grow my wealth steadily and securely. Furthermore, I took advantage of opportunities to advance my career. I sought out additional training and certifications related to my field. These efforts paid off when I received a significant promotion and raise. The increased income allowed me to save more and invest more aggressively. Through all of this, I remained focused on my long-term goals. I wanted to ensure that I could retire comfortably and enjoy my later years without financial work. I'd also wanted to be in a position to help my loved ones if they ever needed support. This vision kept me motivated and disciplined. Eventually, my efforts paid off. I was able to buy a beautiful home in a great neighborhood. I also traveled to places I had always dreamed of visiting. More importantly, I built strong relationships with friends and family who truly cared about me. These connections brought me joy and fulfillment. Looking back, I realized that the challenges I faced with my ex-husband and in-laws taught me valuable lessons. They pushed me to become more self-reliant and financially savvy. They also helped me appreciate the importance of surrounding myself with trustworthy and supportive people. In conclusion, I transformed a difficult situation into an opportunity for growth. By focusing on my financial health and personal development, I created a better future for myself. I hope my story inspires others to take control of their lives and make positive changes. What did you think of the story? Please subscribe to our channel and see you in the next video. It's nice to think she won't be around for a while. My youngest brother was getting married, and I was busy getting ready for an overnight stay. I even took paid time off from work to leave our home where I live with my in-laws. It's been a while since I did that. I was packing my overnight bag for the celebration when I heard my mother-in-law's voice behind me. Never come back. And while you're at it, why don't you just get a divorce and leave? She said. Sure, as you wish. I responded calmly and accepted her spite with a quiet smile. Leaving her sneering taunts behind, I stepped out of the house. Before I got too far, I said goodbye to our home. Thank you for everything. It's been a long time. I don't remember ever being looked after by my mother-in-law, but somehow I felt very lighthearted. I pulled along a slightly oversized suitcase, rushing to where my beloved family awaited. I'll be staying at the hotel for 3 nights and 4 days. What comes after that remains a secret. My mother-in-law doesn't know that I will never return as a resident of this house. I'm Michelle Williams, a 53-year-old part-timer. While working at an office, I also manage our busy household. My husband Daniel and I are the same age, and our marriage has lasted over 31 years. It was an arranged meeting recommended by an acquaintance, but we're a couple who share similar values and get along well. The only loneliness comes from Daniel's job as a sailor. He works for a shipping company and can be away from home for over a year at times. Still, our relationship is good, and we are blessed with a son. We live in a house with my in-laws until recently. I was mainly responsible for taking care of my husband's grandmother who lived with us. I used my income to hire a caregiver during the day. After that, I took care of her mostly by myself. This went on until my grandmother-in-law passed away. Michelle, thank you for everything over the years. Grandma must have been happy, too. She was grateful to you until the end," Daniel said, his kind words bringing tears to my eyes. Surrounded by children to great-grandchildren, my grandmother-in-law was well cared for. In her younger days, when I was new to household tasks, she taught me how to live properly. She was kind and fun, though strict at times, and seemed to laugh most of the time. Thanks to her, I could keep my job for my younger days and work part-time, even during caregiving, despite caregiving being a significant burden. Now that it's over, I find myself cherishing those days with nostalgia. I never imagined that the environment around me would change so drastically right after that. Daniel, due to his job on the ship, often has to be away from home for long periods. I'm proud of him for his important work in American logistics, but living with my in-laws puts me at a disadvantage. The moment my grandmother-in-law passed away, my mother-in-law's attitude changed dramatically. Previously, she would try to appease me with sweet talk while dumping all the caregiving responsibilities on me. But as soon as the caregiving ended, she began to disregard me. When she went out, she would deliberately exclude me from the Southerners, and when we passed each other in the house, she would bump into me on purpose. Her overly hostile behavior was so shocking that I couldn't help but be surprised before feeling disgusted. Moreover, my son Adam, who happened to be visiting, said something to me. "Hey!" Grandma started saying nasty things again. It's an old story, but when Adam was just 5 or 6 years old, there was a significant incident with my mother-in-law. She filled Adam with baseless accusations against me. And upset, Adam reported this to the whole family. "Your mom is cheating. She's going to leave you eventually. That woman is no good. She doesn't work, and she's all bad. Your dad hates her, too. That's why he doesn't come home. You got that?" I was shocked to learn she had been teaching him such lies. I wasn't cheating, and despite working every day and doing household chores, I was truly busy. Moreover, the reason Daniel was absent was genuinely because of work. That's such a joke. It's ridiculous to take it seriously anyway. Such a small kid won't understand anything. My mother-in-law sulked, and my father-in-law was also furious about it. I was too busy comforting a sad Adam to worry about anything else. Later, when Daniel came home, I felt relieved as he changed his demeanor and scolded my mother-in-law. Now, let's return to the present. Daniel is currently away for work. Maybe because of that, my mother-in-law seems to be taking full advantage. You'd think she'd have more free time now that the caregiving is over, but instead she keeps me very busy. She frequently hands me complicated recipes to cook and demands a thorough cleaning. Just the other day, she invited the neighborhood ladies over and they watched a marathon of dramas. I thought they were just enjoying themselves, but I ended up having to clean up the messy room full of snack wrappers and drink spills right during the busiest time before dinner. It added unnecessary work, and I was understandably irritated. "Really? You're such a drag. Aren't you done yet? Hurry up and get dinner ready," she'd say while I was sweating from cleaning up. But come dinner time, she wouldn't even sit at the table, claiming she was full from the snacks. I was utterly exasperated. Then Adam complained to me. She says she doesn't like you and that you should disappear. "I'm going back home. I feel sick. Wouldn't it be better if we lived separately from Grandma? I think Dad would understand, too." I calmed down and upset Adam and drove him to the station for his return trip. Of course, I couldn't let things continue like this. Soon, I'll need to have a serious talk with Daniel. The day after Adam left, I was troubled, not by my mother-in-law, but by something else. Suddenly, I started feeling unwell. My limbs were cold, yet my face would suddenly heat up, and I'd break out in a sweat. It seems like today my symptoms of menopause were particularly severe. I've been feeling oddly unwell since last year, and the doctors told me it's menopause. Right now, they're just watching how it goes with no medication yet, but some days can be tough. Maybe the stress from what I heard about my mother-in-law's behavior is getting to me. By evening, my condition worsened, and I was lying down in my room. "Hey, what are you sleeping for dinner?" I could hear my mother-in-law stomping towards me. I had such a headache that it was hard to even get up, let alone deal with her. I thought about pretending to be asleep, but she suddenly yanked off the blanket, and I reluctantly sat up. Dinner. She clapped her hands as she demanded dinner. If she wants dinner, she should make it herself. Why does she always expect me to do it as if she's someone special? My grandmother-in-law used to manage the kitchen, but lately, it's only been me cooking. My mother-in-law only steps into the kitchen when Daniel is home. And even then, she barely does more than arrange the plates. Maybe she can't cook at all. I'm feeling unwell. I think it's menopause, but I really can't do the housework today. Please, can you make dinner today? I managed to say, feeling utterly tired. My mother-in-law had severe menopause symptoms herself. I had already moved in with them and had my fair share of her snapping at me. So there's no doubt about it. I thought she'd understand the pain if I mentioned it was menopause. However, her reaction was the exact opposite of what I had hoped for. With a snort, she suddenly turned a bag over my head. What? I let out a small scream as something showered down on me in the dim room. Just waking from sleep and feeling sick, I couldn't tell what it was at first. A moment later, I realized it was the smell of potatoes. The bag she turned upside down was nearly empty, but she had sprinkled me with snack crumbs. The sheer unexpectedness of it left me dumbfounded for a moment. "Don't be lazy," she said with a click of her tongue, and then left the room. Here I was, bedridden and in pain, being yelled at. I almost felt like clicking my tongue back at her. How could she do something like this? Rather than anger, it was a bizarre sensation, like seeing some rare animal. I felt sure that my limit was nearing. About half a year later, I had taken some paid leave from work and was preparing for a trip. It was for my younger brother's wedding. He had been living with his girlfriend for a few years, and they were finally tying the knot. Their home is in Michigan, and they wanted to have the wedding there. Since it's quite far from here, I booked a hotel for a 3-night, 4-day stay. I decided to take the trip and participate overnight. My younger brother offered to cover the hotel costs, but I declined. Since the date of the ceremony was set according to my schedule, I wanted to pay for it myself. It's a small ceremony with just the family, but it's a rare opportunity for all the relatives to gather, so I'm looking forward to it. Since nobody else would likely prepare meals in my absence, I decided to make a week's worth of meals in advance. The night before leaving, while we were eating dinner, I told my in-laws about the meals I prepared and stored in the fridge. My father-in-law thanked me, but as usual, my mother-in-law seemed displeased with everything about me. "Why are you even going to your brother's wedding? It's just a remarriage, isn't it? Probably nothing good," she said with a frown. And my father-in-law glared at her. "Actually, both my brother and his partner are marrying for the first time," I replied. My mother-in-law burst out laughing with a rude expression. "First marriage at 41. There must be something seriously wrong with him to be single that long. Your brother's at a good age, yet he's having a flashy wedding. Shameless." She seemed to be confusing him with another brother, or had completely forgotten about my family structure. In fact, I have 3 brothers. The youngest brother and I have a 15-year age gap, so he's still quite young. "No, it's my youngest brother who's getting married. He's in his early 33s and his partner is in her 24s, I explained, shrugging. My mother-in-law raised her eyebrows, offended by the correction, but soon twisted her face into a sneer again. "How creepy. His partner is 24. That's like a parent and child," she said. I was astonished at her refusal to listen. This time, even my father-in-law seemed to realize a mistake. Clearing his throat, I swallowed a sigh as I responded, "It's not 24. She's in her 24s. They are only 5 or 6 years apart. Doesn't that sound normal to you?" I talked to her over video call the other day, and she seemed like a very sensible young lady. I ended the conversation with my in-laws and started preparing to leave. At the venue, I should see Adam and my parents as well. I packed a beautiful outfit for the seer into my suitcase and meticulously checked for anything I might have forgotten. From the living room, I could hear my mother-in-law loudly talking to my father-in-law. It will be refreshing to have her gone for a while. I felt the malice in her words on my back as I bit my lip. Getting angry now could provoke her to tamper with my carefully packed belongings. Better to endure until I leave the house the next morning. I pulled my slightly large suitcase and headed to the front door. Never come back. And while you're at it, why don't you just get a divorce and leave? Her words momentarily stopped me. As I began walking towards the entrance again, I answered cheerfully, "Yes, as you wish." My voice was calmer than I expected. Maybe I'm more relieved by the situation than I realized. I had reached my limit of endurance long ago. Actually, I had been in touch with Daniel beforehand, steadily preparing for this day. Just stop with the nonsense and really do it soon. My mother-in-law scoffed, munching on snacks and laughing early in the morning. It's surprising how much she can eat. Just after waking up, I decided to walk to the station. As I left the house, before getting too far, I looked back at our familiar home and said with emotion, I really owe this house a lot, except for my mother-in-law. I've been grateful to this home for a long time, to my grandmother-in-law, my father-in-law, Daniel, and Adam. I even feel indebted to the roof and the walls, but I can't recall ever needing my mother-in-law's help. Somehow, I feel incredibly lighthearted. I hurried to the place where my beloved family was waiting, pulling a slightly large suitcase behind me. I planned to stay at the hotel for 3 nights and 4 days. After that, I'm set to move into a new place where I can live alone. I met up with Daniel at my brother's wedding venue. We had planned this beforehand. The reason the wedding was scheduled at this time was so Daniel could be sure to attend. Hard day, huh? Got this for you? Daniel said with a lonely smile, pulling out divorce papers. His name hadn't been filled in yet. We were both going to sign it, mutually agreeing it would be our final joint task as a couple. Thanks. Let's write it when we get back to the hotel. I booked a twin room. Hope that's okay. Though it's sad for my brother getting married today, this is also a new beginning for us. I hope it's okay that our signing the divorce papers happens on the same day as the wedding. I won't announce it in front of everyone today, but we'll have to make it known later that we've divorced. Of course, a double would have been fine, too. Thanks for booking. Daniel and I smiled affectionately at each other. No one could possibly imagine that in a few hours, we'd be signing divorce papers. I marvel at how heavy a single piece of paper can feel. Filing this means we won't be husband and wife anymore after being together for over 31 years. Just one sheet is all it takes. I'm truly sorry. Daniel apologized, but I shook my head. Being with Daniel was always genuinely happy for me. I knew when I married him that he wouldn't be home much, and there was nothing I disliked about that. It was just his mother that I could never get along with. Don't apologize. You were a wonderful husband. Let's be good friends from now on, I said with all the fondness I felt. Tearfully, Daniel took my hand. Thank you for everything, Daniel repeated, making me tear up as well. I secretly decided to attribute these tears to happiness for my brother's wedding. The next day, Daniel went back to his parents' home alone. He explained the situation to his in-laws. At first, my father-in-law was just shocked by the sudden mention of divorce, but when he understood the full story, he became furious. How dare you drive out someone who cared for my mother until the end? He shouted angrily, causing my mother-in-law to visibly panic. While I was primarily involved in caring for my grandmother-in-law, including the physically demanding tasks like bathing, my father-in-law, who had been strong since his youth, helped me towards the end. He also took care of turning our bedridden grandmother in bed. In a way, my father-in-law and our caregiving partners. However, my mother-in-law really hadn't helped with anything. It seems my father-in-law had been silently resentful about this. You've been terrible at housework ever since you married into the family. I kept quiet because you gave birth to our son, but you used my mother's leniency as an excuse to avoid helping out. You're nothing like Michelle, who did everything. His grievances escalated. My mother-in-law tried to retort when compared to me, But my father-in-law started speaking before she could get a word in. It should have been you who left. To think we lost a hard-working daughter-in-law like that. Do you have any idea how much luxury Michelle's salary provided us? You haven't earned a single penny. Mentioning money put my mother-in-law in a weak position. She had never worked outside the home. The household expenses, including what my in-laws used, were covered by Daniel. Being a sailor, Daniel earned a good salary, and my in-laws converted all their pension into pocket money. Honestly, our family was wealthy. The costs related to the children or my grandmother-in-law's care could actually be covered by Daniel's earnings. Yet, I worked because working was filling for me. That's why I had no problem using my earnings for the family. I gave trips and theater tickets to my in-laws, and for birthdays, I treated them to upscale dining. Truthfully, these gifts were also investments in securing some time for myself. It's not too late, Daniel. Go apologize now and ask Michelle to marry you again, my father-in-law finally said. Realizing how precarious her position was, my mother-in-law was utterly distraught, but it was too late. She couldn't prevent the consequences of her actions from coming back to haunt her. This is the house I built. You leave. My father-in-law, finally enraged, began to drive my mother-in-law out. Understandably, she resisted vehemently, screaming and scratching at her hair in frustration. As she raised her voice in anger, she began clawing at her hair, repeating how frustrated she was. This sight was bizarre and apparently quite frightening. No, I won't leave. I won't divorce. How am I supposed to live alone at this age? In the end, she cried out in resistance, but she was no match for my physically imposing father-in-law, who dragged her out of the house. He firmly shut the door and even locked it. My mother-in-law clung to the front door, crying loudly enough that the neighbors, shocked by the commotion, called the police. Reluctantly, my father-in-law opened the door when approached by the police, but his anger did not subside for several days afterward. My mother-in-law and father-in-law lived as if they were separated within the same house. They didn't speak a word to each other and avoided even looking at each other. Whenever my father-in-law entered the same room, my mother-in-law would flee in fear. Such a life couldn't continue. And ultimately, my father-in-law called his daughter, who lived far away, to hold a family meeting. I'm going to divorce her, he declared, but his daughter showed sympathy for my mother-in-law and opposed the idea, making the discussion difficult. Daniel then detailed the situation, confirming each instance of harassment I had endured. She had even lied to our son, trying to turn him against me. Daniel presented emails he had asked our son to write, recalling those times as evidence. He also spoke about the suffering I endured during my menopause. To this point, my father-in-law, who had witnessed it, expressed his disapproval. I hadn't known, but he had told my mother-in-law to stop such behavior. He had advised her to apologize, but she hadn't followed through. And now this incident. She had unfairly criticized my brother and mockingly told me to divorce and leave. All this happened while Daniel was away, and she acted differently in front of him. Daniel added that I had managed all the household chores and, along with the caregiver, had cared for my grandmother-in-law. In that situation, how would you feel if your husband's mother did the same to you? And if your father-in-law got angry on your behalf, whose side would you take? When Daniel posed this question, his sister fell silent. Seeing this, my mother-in-law became furiously upset. Are you betraying me too after all I did by giving birth to you? Hearing this, she didn't claim to have raised them. I ironically admired her honesty. I had always asked Daniel about this. It was mostly our grandmother who took care of my sister and me. Mom was always out with neighbors, perhaps remembering her past. His sister looked at my mother-in-law with contempt after hearing about the bullying. In the end, the only working housewives in this house were my grandmother-in-law, whom I cared for until the end, and myself. My mother-in-law was indeed the mother who had given birth to 3 children. But when it came to housework, she mostly just wanted to reap the benefits without doing much work. By reflecting on this, her habitual negligence was finally noticed by the family, completely undermining her position. Realizing her situation, my mother-in-law stopped her tirades and began to sob. In the end, it was decided not to divorce out of pity, but my father-in-law is considering separating from her. Upon hearing this, I expressed my desire to meet with my father-in-law. All these events after my departure were relayed to me by Daniel. If Dad was going to get so angry now, he should have helped Michelle from the start. But then again, what can I say when I wasn't there? Daniel sighed despondently, sipping his hot coffee. We were in our favorite cafe, a place we had liked since our younger days. Daniel ordered a coffee, and I chose a soft drink, which I hadn't had in a very long time. As I finished hearing about my mother-in-law's disgraceful behavior, I smiled softly. Don't be too hard on yourself. You were away because of your job, right? It's an important job. There are many people who rely on you. I understand that. My words of encouragement weren't false. Daniel's job is admirable. Being a sailor, supporting people's lives by working in maritime shipping, sometimes away for years at a time. I think that's incredible. That's why I've been putting up with it. But I'm sorry for this time. I still like and respect you, but I just couldn't bear being family with your parents anymore. I finally managed to say the words that had been stuck in my chest for so long. Daniel looked a bit sad, but nodded in understanding. He didn't blindly side with his parents just because they were his family. He understood the situation fairly, which made me incredibly happy. I couldn't help but smile broadly, and Daniel looked at me as if dazzled. I only heard about what Daniel was feeling at that moment much later. He said he thought, "Oh, she's beautiful." Your smile was more radiant than ever before. To me, at that moment, Daniel also seemed sweeter than ever before. Now, back to the story. The day after I met Daniel at the cafe, I met with his father with Daniel's cooperation. It was time for the final act of my revenge. When Daniel's father arrived at the cafe, he was dressed a bit more stylishly than usual since he was going out. After some small talk about the weather, I quickly brought up the main topic. I heard from Daniel that you're considering separating from your wife. It's fine while you're still healthy, but it'll be tough on your own later, right? Especially after all the commotion. If you really do decide to separate, I'm willing to help with caring for you in your later years. His father clearly looked pleased by this. Daniel's sister lived far away, and his son Daniel could be away for long periods at sea. He had never been one to do much around the house, like cooking, cleaning, or laundry. He would surely appreciate my help, having taken care of his mother until the end. Of course, I'll separate from her. No, wait. Maybe it's better to divorce, he said, furrowing his brow and crying, crossing his arms. I was hoping that my almost certainly ousted mother-in-law would go from almost definitely ousted, but it seemed the situation was developing even more unfavorably for her. If I suddenly dropped dead, she'd probably make a big fuss, wouldn't she? Better to divorce her properly before that. That's definitely better, he continued. Daniel looked as if he wanted to say, "Here we go again," as his father began speaking more decisively. His father has a tendency to act swiftly once he's made up his mind. Sometimes he even goes a bit too far, but that's just his nature. Knowing this, I felt a sense of satisfaction as the situation unfolded. I nodded in agreement with a grin. You really do think things through. I'm impressed by your foresight, I said, knowing how to handle him after living with him for so many years. Pushing him a little like this would likely lead him to actually do it. Daniel chuckled, sensing my intentions, but chose not to stop me. He was probably more angered by my mother-in-law's behavior than I was. His father, energized, stood up to go get the divorce papers right then. Out of kindness, I decided to introduce the lawyer, Daniel, and I consulted for our divorce to help my father-in-law. From that day on, my father-in-law began actively pursuing the divorce. It was clear that my mother-in-law was destined for a lonely life. 2 weeks later, I returned to what was once my familiar home, now just my former in-law's house, to collect the belongings I hadn't been able to take with me before. I had taken all the valuables, but it was impossible to take everything, clothes, books, photos filled with memories, drawings by my son when he was little, and bedding and furniture I bought with my own salary. Over the years, I had accumulated many personal items in that house. This visit turned out to be the last time I would see my mother-in-law. By then, her divorce had been decided, and she was visibly panicking. As I went to collect my belongings, she began to kneel before me, her face pale, as she started apologizing. "Michelle, please forgive me. I beg you. It was all just a joke. Please come back and convince your husband." I completely ignored her and continued packing. After continuing to grovel, my mother-in-law stood up abruptly. It seemed she was upset at being ignored. She began to hurl vile insults at me again, reverting to her old ways. "This woman, how dare you when I'm being so humble? You've been nothing but trouble since you married into this family. Just leave and die alone miserably," she shouted, adding more simpler yet unrepeatable insults. I continued to ignore her and packed the item into a cardboard box. Suddenly, she screamed and lunged at the box. Taken aback, I dodged and she ended up overturning the box that contained neatly folded clothes. The clothes were scattered all over the floor. She then began stomping on and kicking the clothes like throwing a tantrum. "Enough already!" Daniel shouted and glared at her, standing tall. His mother, usually hearing only compliance from her obedient son, froze as if it were the end of the world. I held back Daniel with one hand and turned an emotionless face towards my mother-in-law. "I am no longer your daughter-in-law. You are no longer my mother-in-law. Our relationship is completely over. Thank you for nothing. I was helped by your mother and father-in-law and your husband." I swiftly stepped around the scattered clothes without bothering to fold them again. I just stuffed them into the box and lifted it up. "Don't touch my things, stranger. Goodbye." I tossed those final words at the disheveled mother-in-law and quickly left the room. I had no desire to share space with that woman any longer. I called Daniel to take care of the rest of the belongings. I got into the car driven by my brother and waited as he prepared to leave. I could still hear my mother-in-law shrieking from inside the house, but listening to her was a waste of time. After left, I heard she continued to beat her own head and wailed terribly. As far as I was concerned, there was never a chance for reconciliation, but it seemed she deeply regretted cutting off her last hope. But her regrets were too late to matter to anyone. About a month later, my mother-in-law was finally evicted from the house and began living alone in a modest place. Daniel occasionally visits his mother to check on her well-being, as does his sister. I've heard that my mother-in-law now lives in her old clothes, substituting them for pajamas, and doesn't even bother to take a shower regularly. Apart from shopping, she hardly goes outside, spending her days eating fast food and budget snacks while lamenting her impoverished life. Apparently, she did split some assets with my father-in-law during the divorce. But sadly, it wasn't a significant amount, and she's living with financial insecurity. In her old age. I don't know about my sister, but I'm not giving her any support. That's obvious, right? Daniel told me this with a shrug. As a well-paid sailor, Daniel was always a source of pride for his mother. She never expected to be completely cut off by her own son. All this was because she constantly disregarded me, the wife her son chose. And yet, the irony is that she herself had said, "Never come back and just get a divorce and leave." Now she's the one who can't ever come back. It's exactly like the saying, "Curses return upon the heads of those that curse." She should have been prepared to face her own misfortunes if she wished ill on others. 5 years after the divorce, I'm enjoying a peaceful life alone with my cat in an apartment about a 25-minute drive from what used to be my in-laws' home. I found this place after looking for somewhere convenient for commuting to work. The rental is pet-friendly and welcomes animals. It's a lovely place with good sunlight. I still visit my former father-in-law's home once a week to cook him various dishes. Our relationship has improved since the divorce. My sister-in-law, who lives far away, can hardly look me in the eye given how much I still help out. Daniel and I still keep in touch. In fact, When he returns from his long sea voyages, we make sure to go on dates. It's almost like we're courting each other anew. We go to movies, visit museums, and despite being somewhat new at this, our relationship feels fresh and exciting. We spend hours on the phone and exchange messages, finding it surprisingly enjoyable. Adam, who visits us on his days off, jokes about our fake divorce, saying, "You two just went back to being lovers, didn't you?" But the truth is, Daniel and I never were lovers. Years before our marriage was arranged, and we never really had a period of romance. So now it's like I'm building a romantic relationship with him for the first time. We even have a secret pact. If we ever find ourselves completely free from having to deal with his mother, whether she passes away, moves in with his sister, or goes into a facility, then we'll remarry. Daniel suggests that this would be when no more welfare checks on his mother are necessary. Discussions about whether his sister and her husband will start living with her or place her in a facility have already begun. Our reunion might not be so far off after all. After more than 31 years together, and now nearing our 55s, it feels somewhat embarrassing to talk about this, but I'm thrilled at the prospect of experiencing true love with Daniel, whom I've always cared for deeply. You should just rent a cheap apartment and live there. After all, someone who just stays at home doesn't deserve to live in this house, said Kelly, who had returned from the city. She was now trying to drive me out of the house where I was living with my in-laws, planning to take my place. My in-laws don't understand working from home, and my husband, who wants the house, is siding with Kelly. Together with Kelly, my husband, Eric, and my in-laws keep blaming me. Do they even realize who is paying the mortgage for this house? That's when it struck me. If I left, who would pay the $7,500 monthly mortgage? There was no reason for me to keep living with these people who made me feel so terrible. If they wanted me to leave, then I would leave. I had endured enough, and my anger had reached its peak. "I'll change the ownership and mortgage to your name," I told my husband. With that, I divorced my overjoyed husband, Eric, and left the house. Little did they know they would soon face an unexpected situation. My name is Lauren. I used to live with my husband, Eric, who is 3 years older than me. I met Eric while working at a company, but it wasn't the typical office romance. Eric worked for the cleaning company that serviced my office. When I met my husband, I had just lost both of my parents in quick succession. First, my father was diagnosed with an illness, and the doctors gave him only 4 months to live. While caring for him, my mother fell ill too, and despite her fight, they both passed away, leaving me alone. Having no siblings, I suddenly found myself all by myself, struggling to accept the reality that my parents were gone. After their passing, I would often think of them at random moments and tear up. However, I tried to hide my feelings from those around me who were being considerate. I forced myself to smile all the time while at work. The first time my husband Eric spoke to me, I was trying not to let anyone notice as tears welled up in my eyes. I stood in the hallway during a break, staring blankly out the window, lost in thoughts of my parents. I had seen Eric at work before, and we had exchanged nods, but we had never spoken, and I didn't even know his name yet. Eric approached me as I looked out the window and asked, "Are you okay? You seem a bit down." In response to Eric's mental inquiry, I found myself talking about my parents. Maybe it was easier because he was a stranger whose name I didn't even know. When Eric heard about my parents passing, he sympathized, saying he was close to his own parents and could understand the loneliness. I was glad that Eric listened to my story. After that, we started having brief conversations whenever we saw each other at work, and it didn't take long before we started meeting outside of work. Soon after we started dating, Eric introduced me to his parents. As Eric had mentioned, he seemed to have a good relationship with them. His parents, aware of my loss, were considerate and invited me to visit them any time. I quickly grew close to my in-laws, and without a formal proposal, it naturally led to me marrying Eric. After the wedding, we rented an apartment near my in-laws and started our life together. After getting married, I quit my job and switched to a company that allowed me to work fully remotely from home. I did this considering the possibility of having children with Eric in the future. I told Eric about my career change, but it seems he didn't quite understand it. For now, he just knows that I work from home, using my computer. Since my salary didn't change after switching jobs, I decided to take care of the living expenses. Eric earned less than I did, so we agreed that I would pay for our expenses while Eric would save his salary except for what he spent on social activities. Eric didn't have any expensive hobbies, and before we married, his social expenses were mostly just dates with me or going out with friends. Eric himself said he was okay with me managing our savings. So, this is how we handled our finances. Working from home was all positives for me. Above all, I was happy that I could enjoy leisurely meals with Eric when he came home. This wouldn't have been possible if I were still working at my previous company. Before marriage, I often made simple meals just for myself, but now wanting to please Eric, I find myself wanting to cook more elaborate dishes. Our life together was peaceful, but then a few years into our marriage, something shocking happened. My in-laws' house was completely destroyed in a fire. Fortunately, my in-laws were unharmed, but they lost all their possessions and irreplaceable memories like photo albums. For a while, my in-laws stayed in our apartment, and they were deeply upset. I wanted to cheer up the two people who had helped me heal from the loss of my own parents, so I did everything I could to care for them. I cooked, of course, and also took care of the household chores during breaks from work, making sure they felt comfortable. On weekends, Eric and I would go out with them. However, my in-laws felt like they were being a burden and struggled to regain their usual cheerfulness. They often mentioned that they couldn't stay with us forever and were concerned about imposing on us. So, my husband Eric and I decided to build a house to live with my in-laws. Until now, my in-laws had never brought up the idea of living together, but Eric and I had been considering it. In preparation, I had been saving for myself, salary separate from the savings my husband was making, thinking it was better to get a mortgage sooner rather than later. I suggested that we use this opportunity to build a house. My in-laws were delighted, and the conversation quickly came to an agreement. The house they had lived in was a charming wooden structure built by my great-grandfather. It had been fine when they were younger, but as they aged, they started experiencing various health issues. Therefore, they had many requests for the new house. Eric too wanted to add various features, thinking that if we were going to build it, we might as well do it right. Ultimately, the cost ended up being much higher than anticipated, still convincing myself that we would be living there for a long time. I agreed to build a house that met all three of their requests. I began to sense something was off around this time. Eric was excessively claiming to his parents and Kyle that he was the one building the house, and they were constantly thanking only him. Even though the house and the mortgage were in my name and the down payment came from my savings, it seemed like Eric hadn't mentioned this to Rachel and Kyle at all. Because of Eric's insistent claims that it was his house, Rachel and Kyle started pressuring me to thank Eric as well. I appreciate Eric, not just for the money. I paid more because I could, not because I wanted gratitude from Eric or Rachel and Kyle. However, even when Rachel and Kyle said things to me, Eric didn't stand up for me. Instead, he jokingly said, "That's right. You should be grateful to me for letting you live in a new house." I was definitely upset after hearing these falsehoods repeatedly. I understand that Eric has his pride, so I didn't ask him to tell his parents the whole truth, but I did ask him to stop making it seem like I was doing nothing. However, Eric, feeling more confident because of our new house, just wouldn't listen. Then I found out that Eric was telling a terrible lie to his parents. He incredibly told them he worked at the same company where I used to work, which is considered a well-known major corporation. True, Eric still has dealings with that company. But as I began to notice Eric's lies and his inflated pride, I started to feel increasingly distrustful of him. I also felt uncomfortable because his parents always seemed to favor him. Still, I thought once we moved into our new home, the issue of who built the house wouldn't come up anymore. So, I just kept enduring patiently. However, Once our new home was completed and we started living there, their attitude towards me clearly began to change. It seemed like my in-laws, just like Eric, didn't understand the concept of working from home. They thought I was just playing around because I didn't go out during the day and was always at my computer. Eric had been complaining to them that Lauren is just playing around all day, and they seemed to have completely believed it. Before we moved, they never said anything. Maybe because they felt I was taking care of them, but the sarcasm increased as soon as we moved. They would say things like, "Eric built such a fine house, and you just stay in and play around. Must be nice. Why don't you work a little and help Eric out?" Even when I was working on my computer, they would come to my room just to make these snide Eric. The discomfort made me leave the house more and more, working for a cafe instead. I repeatedly asked Eric to clear up his parents' misunderstanding. While Eric might not understand the work I do, it's my salary that's supporting his and his parents' lifestyle. All I needed was for him to tell his parents that. But Eric just said, just let them say whatever they want, still not listening, since they thought I wasn't working. I got stuck with all the housework, and his parents started bossing me around. I couldn't take it anymore, and finally stood up to them. Eric was there too, and I thought he would finally take my side, seeing how upset I was, but instead he yelled at me, "Don't talk back." Then he thrust a completed divorce paper at me, threatening divorce if I didn't comply. I had never seen Eric so angry before, and his behavior completely intimidated me, making me give in to him and his parents' demands. From that day on, both his parents and Eric's attitudes towards me turned utterly cold. The only time I felt seen and could find some solace was when I was working at my computer. I immersed myself in work to forget the treatment I received from my in-laws and husband. One day, my sister-in-law, Kelly, who had been living in the city, came back to visit. She was coming to see the new house and planned to stay for a while. My in-laws immediately started complaining about me to her. They said Lauren is always cooped up in her room, playing on her computer. Does she even realize whose generosity allows her to live in such a nice house? What on earth is she doing on that computer all day playing games? Is she some kind of nerd? That's just weird. We don't really understand all this, but maybe she's one of those nerds. You think if she's always on her computer, she must be one, right? Isn't she ashamed of not working? Trying to escape their loud conversation meant for me to hear, I went to my room. Then I heard something even more shocking. They said, "Wasn't Lauren just a cleaner at Eric's company? It's amazing how she lies about working from home. She couldn't possibly have the skills for that." Kelly was talking as if my and Eric's roles were completely reversed. Since Eric had told his parents he worked at a major corporation, maybe he had also lied that I was a cleaner. The real liar here was Eric. I wanted to tell this to Rachel and Kelly, but given everything that had happened, I doubted they would believe me, so I just gave up. Ever since Kelly came to visit, my place at the dining table was taken over by her, and I couldn't even eat at the same time as everyone else. While they ate the meals I prepared during my work breaks, I would be secluded in my room, continuing my work. This went on for a week, and the day for Kelly to return to the city came. But suddenly Kelly declared, "I'm going to live in this house too. After staying here, I found it quite comfortable. I just quit my job, so I've decided to move back here," Kelly said. She had been working in the apparel industry, but got tired of the office drama and decided to take a break. Her family home was being rebuilt, and when she returned and saw our new house, she found it more luxurious than she had expected. Leaving the city to start a business here could be good. "At my level, I can work from anywhere," she said. My in-laws, Rachel and Kyle, were thrilled with Kelly's words, and Eric seemed quite pleased with the compliments about the house too. However, there was no designated room for Kelly in this house. Until now, she had been staying in the guest room, but if she were to live here permanently, another room for Kelly would be needed, and the house had no spare rooms. Kelly had realized this after living with us for a week. She told me, "I'll live here, so you should leave," with a smug, malicious grin. "People who just play around at home don't deserve to live in a house like this. You should find some cheap apartment somewhere and live there." "No, This house is mine because I started to say, but Rachel cut me off. That's a good idea. You do nothing but stay at home all day. Rachel sided with Kelly, leaving me no room to argue. I tried desperately to explain my job, but Kelly, who had just said that work could be done from anywhere, wouldn't understand about working from home. Just because I'm not going out, they say I'm not working. They're trying to corner me with such an absurd argument. After everything that's happened, I'm really starting to get angry. Eric doesn't try to speak the truth, just stands there laughing and watching the situation. Until now, I kept quiet considering Eric's position, but I finally told Rachel, Kyle, and Kelly that this house was built in my name. I'm paying for all the mortgage and all the living expenses. The down payment came from my savings, and Eric hasn't paid a single penny. Seeing me speak up to this extent, Eric was clearly panicked. However, the only things that came out of his mouth were words to berate me and self-serving statements to hide the truth. He shouted at me, calling me noisy, telling me to shut up, and calling me a liar. Eric was obviously flustered, and it was clear he was hiding something. Yet Rachel, Kyle, and Kelly still defended him, calling me the liar no matter how many times I tried to explain. I said it wasn't a lie, but they didn't believe me. That's when it struck me. If I left, who would pay the monthly mortgage of $7,500? There was no reason for me to keep living with these people enduring such unpleasantness. If this house is supposedly built by Eric, who works at a major corporation, maybe it should all truly be his. With that thought, I decided to sign the divorce papers that Eric had pushed on me intending to threaten me. When I offered to change the house's title to Eric's name, he was so delighted he almost danced. He must have thought the house would now fully become his own in name and reality. He's not wrong, but Eric misunderstood one thing. Initially, to change the mortgage to his name, we tried to go through the process together, but Eric disliked the complex procedures and told me to handle it alone. Just you go and listen. Listen to all that complicated stuff. It's just a name change, right? Get it ready for my signature only, he said. Since that wasn't possible, I took the reluctant Eric to the bank and a legal professional for consultation. Throughout, Eric didn't listen to the explanations and just played with his smartphone. When it came to signing the documents, he finally became eager. If I sign this, the house will be in my name, right? He asked. After I confirmed, he happily signed the documents. Once all the procedures are completed, both the house and the mortgage will finally be Eric's. I've explained it several times, but I wonder if Eric has truly realized it. He was ecstatically reporting to Rachel, Kelly, and Kyle. Even after hearing this, how can they still believe that Eric works at a major corporation and I'm unemployed? I watched this scene with a feeling of astonishment. After changing the house and mortgage to his name, I filed for divorce. We're going on a trip to celebrate this. So you better move out while we're gone, Eric said, waiting for the procedures to finalize. Eric took Rachel, Kelly, and Kyle on a ridiculous divorce celebration trip. They were apparently going abroad and wouldn't be back for about 15 days. During that time, I sold all the furniture and appliances I had brought into the house and packed my belongings into the car ready to leave while handling various procedures in parallel. I was also looking for a new house and moved immediately after packing my belongings. The place I chose for my fresh start is the top floor of a high-rise condo. It was a stroke of luck that this condo worth about $8 million was available. However, given the timing, I thought it must have become available just for me, and I decided to boldly purchase it. For the last few years living with Rachel, Kyle, and Eric had been stressful. So, I was thrilled about my new life ahead. In fact, I had an inheritance left by my deceased parents. I had been investing using that inheritance even before marrying Eric. Initially intended as just a way to earn some pocket money, these investments turned out to be a huge success. And now my assets amount to several $1 million. I had planned to use that money for a relaxed early retirement with Eric in the future. I had kept this asset a secret, intending to surprise Eric. But now I'm truly glad I never mentioned it. If I had told them, Rachel, Kyle, and Kelly might have joined forces to take my assets. Living with that family, I painfully learned just how careless they are with money. The house I lived in with Eric and his parents was decorated mainly based on their preferences, so it wasn't to my taste. With the move to the condo, I took the opportunity to create a space I love, carefully crafting the interior to my liking. Now it has become the perfect space, surrounded only by things I adore. Above all, there's no one around to make snide Eric, so I can happily work from home. Once things settle down, I'm planning to join a cooking class or yoga studio. Finally, in this enjoyable and free time, I have regained a peaceful mind for the first time in years. The call from Eric came the night they returned from their trip abroad. He must have realized that the furniture and appliances were gone upon returning home. He demanded them back, but I paid no attention. Everything was bought with my money, so it's my choice to do what I want with it. I didn't want to leave anything of mine in the house of those who had caused me so much suffering, not even the furniture and appliances. Of course, they were unnecessary for my new home. When I told Eric that I had already sold them, he still demanded I buy them back immediately. It's impossible. You working at a major corporation should just buy new ones. I retorted and then hung up the phone. That day, Eric called several times, but I ignored all of his calls. Months had passed since Eric and his family returned from their overseas trip. I had completely forgotten about my previous life and was having a great time getting along well with my neighbors. That day, I was returning from a cooking class I attended, invited by a friend who lived on the floor below. Suddenly, I received a call from Eric. Although I was suspicious, I answered, thinking there might be an issue with paperwork that needed attention. As soon as I answered, Eric shouted in a loud voice, "What is this all about?" It was just like the day they returned from their overseas trip. One wondering if there was anything else besides the furniture and appliances that could have angered my husband. I decided to listen closely. It turns out he had finally noticed the amount of the loan repayments when he opened a letter that had arrived at the house. He saw that the loan repayment amount was listed as $7,500 per month, which is why he called in a panic. "Wasn't the loan already paid off?" he exclaimed. "Of course not. The bank explained everything clearly, didn't they?" I replied, "That's impossible. I never heard about it. With the fire insurance in your savings, why didn't you pay off the mortgage?" He shouted, "No way. That's impossible. Do you even realize how much that house was worth?" I responded shockingly. It seems Eric believed the mortgage was already paid off, despite the bank's detailed explanation, which he had nodded to. He was apparently under a different impression. I was sitting right next to him while watching and listening, so I remember it well. Even if Eric wasn't paying attention, he had already signed the mortgage transfer, so it was too late. Now, Eric kept trying to find a way out of the mortgage payments, but there was nothing I could do about it. Eventually, he seemed to realize that he had no choice but to repay the loan and fell silent, seemingly frustrated. "I thought you'd be struggling to find a place to live," Eric said, clearly under the impression that was in a dire situation. The reason Eric could freely spend his salary until now was because I was the one covering our living expenses. Even after our divorce, I have no trouble living on my own. It's too late for him to realize that he was relying on me for everything. I wondered what kind of life my pretentious ex-husband Eric had been leading these past few months with his parents, Rachel and Kyle. Most likely, they were living luxuriously, doing whatever Kelly suggested. And then he realized there was a mortgage to be paid. I wonder what Eric is going to do now. I thought as if it were someone else's problem since we're practically strangers now. I didn't care at all about how much trouble my ex-husband and his parents, Rachel and Kyle, were in. Seeing him so frustrated, I decided to tell him the truth. Too bad. I moved into a luxury condo with the money I made from a successful investment. While he was speechless, I hung up the phone. There were no calls from him after that, so I thought he had managed somehow. But then out of the blue, he called again. When I answered, wondering what it was about this time, it turned out their house had been seized, and he was in a panic. In the background, I could hear the desperate voices of his parents, Rachel and Kyle, and his sister, Kelly. "What should I do? Help me, Lauren," my ex-husband pleaded. Desperately, a person claiming to be an enforcement officer was visiting their house, and I could hear Rachel, Kyle, and Kelly addressing the officer in the background. According to this officer, the house was about to be put up for auction with details like the auction date and bidding period to be decided once the auctioneer was determined. After the ownership transferred, my ex-husband and his family would be evicted from the house. I thought they must have received warning letters leading up to this. But when I asked my ex-husband, he sounded confused and said they hadn't arrived. However, that couldn't be right, and after persistent questioning, he finally admitted in a small voice, maybe they did arrive. It turned out he had intentionally ignored the letters, realizing they were about loan repayments. The envelopes were already open before I saw them. I thought someone was taking care of the payments, probably Rachel. And Kelly thought the same as my ex-husband. Eventually, a demand for the lump sum repayment of the loan arrived, and it seems my ex-husband and his family were aware of it, but continued to ignore it, thinking someone else would pay it. And so, the house was finally seized. Can't you do something now, like pay it off? You could pull everyone's savings together. There's got to be a way, he begged. I couldn't hide my frustration at my ex-husband's helpless tone. When I suggested they pull their savings to pay off the loan, all he could say was, "It's impossible." Apparently, Rachel and Kyle had squandered their savings on an extravagant overseas trip and were planning to rely on their son, who they thought worked at a big company, for their future. It was all just their assumption. Kelly, his sister, who claimed she quit her job to come back home, was actually fired for an embezzling company. Funds. She talked as if she had been hugely successful in the city, but in reality, she was just a modestly paid accountant in a small to mid-sized company. She got hooked on visiting nightclubs and gradually embezzled money from her company to splurge on them. Even though she had returned home, relying on her parents, Rachel and Kyle, she had the nerve to make grand claims. As for my ex-husband, after our divorce, he pretended to be working at a large corporation and started dipping into his savings to cover living expenses. Rachel, Kyle, and Kelly lived lavishly, and the money he had saved while we were married was completely gone. Then came the demand for the lump sum repayment of the loan. As their financial situations came to light, it seemed like the focus shifted from the court case to blaming each other. In the midst of this, my ex-husband started clinging to me. "Please, Lauren, you're living in that high-rise luxury condo now, right? Let's all live together there again." I refused. We're divorced now, and as far as I'm concerned, we're strangers. Although I had felt a bit sorry for him earlier, I definitely didn't want to live with those people ever again. Hearing the voices of my ex-in-laws, Rachel, Kyle, and Kelly in the background, I felt more resolved and firmly declined my ex-husband's offer. Upon hearing my refusal, Rachel, Kyle, and Kelly immediately started hurling insults at me. I heard various derogatory terms like heartless, scammer, and thief. Perhaps out of spite for being rejected, my ex-husband joined them in berating me. The noise over the phone was unbearable. Despite everything being the result of their own actions, there was no sign of remorse from them. Eventually, all four of them started blaming each other, leaving me out of it and arguing among themselves. I decided then and there to never involve myself with these people again. I quietly hung up the phone and blocked my ex-husband's number. A few days later, I came across a concerning headline in a corner of the newspaper. The article about a father and son getting into a fistfight, and the police being called made me suspect it was about my ex-husband and his father. I decided to contact a mutual acquaintance who lives near my ex-in-law's home. Sure enough, the incident reported in the newspaper was about them, and it happened after I hung up the phone on my ex-husband. The article mentioned that a neighbor noticed the fight and called the police, leading to their arrest. My ex-husband, his father, Rachel, and Kelly, who tried to intervene, all sustained injuries that would take about 3 weeks to heal completely. After receiving a stern warning from the police, they were released. However, the incident making the newspapers meant my ex-husband faced severe reprimands at his workplace. Although he wasn't fired, The cause of the fight was exaggerated and quickly spread throughout the company. My ex-husband feels uncomfortable at work, but can't afford to quite do the financial needs. Eventually, a buyer was found for their house, and they were forced to move out. They managed to find a new place, but it's an old, cramped, bug-infested apartment, a far cry from their previous home. The family of four began their new life there. Bugs appearing daily in the rooms are causing Kelly and Rachel to make such a fuss that they have already received complaints from the neighbors. They try to work and rent a new house quickly, but both in-laws and Kelly seem to get into trouble at work and end up being fired. Especially Kelly, with her past of embezzling company funds becoming widely known, is finding it difficult to get rehired. It looks like they will have to continue living on my ex-husband's income alone. My ex-husband seems to be trying to find out where I live, asking our mutual acquaintances persistently. They have warned me to be careful. Even if my ex-husband finds my condo, he'll just be turned away by the full-time concierge. I gratefully accepted the advice from my acquaintance and made sure to ask the concierge to be on the lookout. With this, the turmoil with my ex-husband and his family finally comes to an end. It hasn't even been a year since I left that house, but it already feels like a distant past event. I've completely adapted to life in my luxury condo, enjoying my days filled with hobbies and work. I plan to enjoy my carefree single life for a while without thinking about marriage. I'm not scared of any threats from a housewife, like you, who has no job and no parents. That's right. You can't do anything with a pile of trash because it's just trash. I get how you feel now. I'm moving out of this house. Well, now you're homeless. Good luck being homeless. This is a good chance for Larry to leave the house. So, let's work together to get rid of the trash and clean up. They went to Larry's room and told him to pack up his stuff and leave. I was planning to leave by myself, but I didn't think Larry would get kicked out too. My name is Lauren. I'm 29 years old, and I'm a housewife. I recently married a man named David. He's 33 years old, 4 years older than me. At first, I thought he was mature and calm, like an older man. Since he often talked about his mother, I thought he was a good man who cared about his family. But after we got married, I saw my husband's true personality on our wedding day. My mother-in-law was very nice to me, and I thought we would have a very happy marriage. My husband asked me to live with his mother after we got married because my father-in-law had passed away a few years ago. He said he wanted to stay close to his mom. I thought my mother-in-law was trustworthy, so I agreed to move in with her. But as soon as we got married, both my mother-in-law and my husband changed. They would say, "Hey, Lauren, hurry up and bring me tea," and clean the bathroom and toilet quickly. My mother-in-law would shout at me and give me orders like that. Maybe she wants to scare me, or it's just because of her age. She would call me loudly and make me do all sorts of chores. The biggest surprise was finding out about my roommate whom no one had told me about when I woke up the other day. I was surprised to find a man I didn't know in the kitchen. I froze wondering who he was. He noticed me and said, "I'm Larry, David's younger brother." He introduced himself. I had never been told that David had a brother, let alone a roommate, so that was a shock. Larry is 30 years old, the same age as me. I went to my mother-in-law and asked her to introduce me to my brother-in-law. She said, "Oh, you mean Larry? Don't worry about him. He's just a reclusive ghost." I was surprised. How could she not care about her own son? She called him a ghost and said she was happy with just David. She said Larry was just a useless hermit who only went out for shopping and stayed home the rest of the time. I was shocked by her words. I felt disappointed in my mother-in-law and couldn't believe how much she had changed since we got married. It was sad to see her discriminate against her own son. I am an only child and have no siblings, so I couldn't compare. I would be shocked if my own mother said such things about me or ignored me. My parents are already dead, and I envy families that are alive and together. I hope that at least parents and children could get along. I asked my husband about Larry when he got home from work. I thought maybe brothers could get along, but my husband was cold. He said, Leave him alone. Just pretend he doesn't exist. He won't harm you." He said it dismissively, as if he had forgotten to mention it. I was disillusioned by how he called his own brother heir. My husband had no family memories or anything. He was just a mama's boy. I finished my chores for the day and went upstairs feeling regret about my marriage. Then I bumped into Larry, who was just going to the bathroom. "You married my brother, didn't you?" Larry said to me. "Yeah, what's wrong?" I replied, "I'm sorry. It's nothing, but I won't say anything bad. You'd better get out of here." What? I asked, confused. "I'm sorry, but you should get a divorce," he said. I was a little offended and confused. I was shocked at how my husband and mother-in-law acted. I married my husband because I loved him. It's unbelievable that Larry would ask me to end our marriage after just one day. "It's none of your business. I can handle it," I said. "I'm a competitive person." "I'm sorry about that," said Larry. "I'm also sorry for my outburst," he added, bowing his head. I thought he was acting strange until a little while ago. I thought I understood why my mother-in-law, and I felt uneasy about the rules. He apologized so politely that I'm not sure if he really meant it. Maybe he was just trying to be nice and warn me. As I was thinking about that, Larry said, "Excuse me," and went into his room. My mother-in-law and husband say my brother-in-law is a strange recluse, but to me, he seems like a decent person who deserves respect. The next day, while I was putting breakfast on the table, Larry came down to get a drink. I said, "Good morning, Larry. Why don't you join us for breakfast?" "Good morning, Lauren. Thank you for asking," Larry replied, glancing at his mother. "I'm not eating breakfast with him. Just get the breakfast done," she yelled at me. "It's okay," Larry said quickly and went back to his room. I wanted to apologize. It's for my strong words yesterday, but I couldn't do it. Hey, all you have to do is housework. Don't do anything unnecessary, okay? My mother-in-law gave me a fierce glare. I was stunned by her harsh attitude. Even though I was a bride, I didn't expect this kind of treatment, and my husband's behavior toward me changed drastically. What the heck? Today's menu is curry. You should have told me before lunch. I had curry for lunch, too, he shouted. How is that my fault? Why didn't he call me and tell me he had curry for lunch and wanted something else? I kept my mouth shut. He continued to yell at me. Hey, you're not apologizing. Who do you think you are? You're here to do the housework. Make sure you understand that. I was shocked and stayed silent. David didn't love me. He just wanted a housekeeper. It's terrible. How could he be so cruel with such a calm voice? They didn't care about me. They just wanted to make themselves comfortable. They were using me. Seeing them giggling and watching TV in the living room, I walked upstairs. As soon as I got upstairs, I burst into tears. Then a hand gently offered me a handkerchief. I still think you should leave, said a familiar voice. I looked up, and it was Larry. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, he said. I wiped my tears in a hurry. I'm sorry I used your handkerchief. No, I gave to you because I wanted you to use it, Larry said. I heard what my brother and mother said. I knew it. They're the worst. He continued. When Larry said that, I asked him what he meant by I knew it. Larry said he had been in a similar situation before. I asked him for more details, and he told me that my husband had promised to marry another woman before, but because my mother-in-law and husband treated her the same way they treat me now, she ran away just before the wedding. Hearing that story made me feel a bit relieved. It showed that my husband and mother-in-law were pretending to be nice before marriage to avoid scaring away the bride. I felt hopeless. How could I have trusted them? But I had nowhere else to go if my husband left me. I'm just a housewife. My husband and mother-in-law wouldn't let me get a part-time job. I can't even move out and rent another place. I didn't know what to do. All I could do was cry. Then Larry said, if we keep talking here, it will look suspicious. Let's talk at a coffee shop next time if you like. He handed me a piece of paper with his contact information on it and went back to his room. I was determined to get out of this house. I was thinking about how my struggle for survival had just begun, I told my mother-in-law I was going to the city office and then stopping by the supermarket on my way home. She warned me not to leave any chores undone. I made sure everything was perfect before leaving. She grumbled about not accepting it if I was late for dinner. I pretended to agree and went to the coffee shop where Larry and I had planned to meet. I told Larry that my parents were gone, so I couldn't rely on them anymore. I had canceled the house I was renting and quit my job. I told him I needed to start all over again. It's hard to move out of the house in this situation, especially with the work that keeps me tied up with my mother-in-law and husband from early in the morning until late at night. Larry then asked me, "Len, can you draw?" "Huh? What do you mean?" I replied, confused. "Oh, I see. So, can you?" "Yes, well, I went to art school before," I said. "Really? That's great," he exclaimed. "Yes, but how?" I asked. "Just in time. Another mega artist is looking for an assistant. You can do it." "Remotely," Larry said. "But I don't have a computer right now." I responded, "I'll lend you my computer that I'm not using right now." Larry said, "Really? Thank you so much. But why do you have an extra computer? What do you do for a living?" I asked. "That's kind of you to ask. You don't think I'm just a recluse, do you?" No. You use polite words a lot, and you look neat and tidy, so I don't think that at all. Do you work from home?" I replied, "Yes, actually, I'm an engineer," Larry said. "An engineer? I didn't know that." "I didn't realize you were a business owner," I exclaimed. "Yes, I used to work for a company, but now I run my own business. It's easier for me to take orders on my own. We also have web designers as employees. We only have a few people, so everything is done remotely," he explained. "I see. So, that's why you're home all the time. But your mother and David said you're just home doing nothing. Haven't you told them the truth?" I asked. "I don't see any benefits in telling those two," Larry replied. "True, but if you're such a good manager, why don't you just leave that house?" I wondered. Larry then shared his thoughts with me for the first time. "Let's not talk about me. I need to introduce you to the manga artist," he said. Larry made a phone call right away, and soon a remote interview was set up for me. I was going to have an interview with the manga artist on Wednesday. My mother-in-law usually had lessons after which she would go out with other participants, so I could do the remote interview. Then I seemed to make a good impression in the interview and got hired immediately. Considering my situation, they said they would send the hiring documents in an envelope addressed to Larry. So, I was all set for the job. Next, we needed to find a place for me to stay. I have a friend who works for a real estate agency. He can give you a good deal, Larry told me. Who is this guy? He seems to have all kinds of resources. Our search for a new place to stay went well, and we were able to sign a contract for a place that met my needs. Just when everything was starting to go smoothly, I had a fight with my husband one day. "Hey, where's dinner?" My husband woke me up while I was sleeping in the bedroom. He was a bit drunk, like he had just come home from drinking dinner. "It's midnight. Besides, you said you didn't want to eat because you were going out for drinks." I said, "Shut up. The king is home, and you don't even get up to greet him. Now you say you didn't make dinner. You're a bad wife. So useless." His words made me really angry. "Do you have any idea how hard I've been working with your mother for you? How can you act so superior to me?" "That's because you're my wife. A wife should support her husband, and your job is to take care of the house. If you can't do your chores, don't go against me. A wife who can't do the housework is just like trash." As my husband said this, I heard the door open. My mother-in-law left in an awkward way. "You're just like trash. Larry is also trash, and this place looks like a dump." My husband sneered as my mother-in-law agreed. "Yes, let's take out the oversized trash," he added. "What did you just say?" I asked him. He opened the drawer and pulled out a piece of paper. "This is what I mean. It's a divorce paper. You're no good to me anymore. I'm going to find another wife who can take your place. That's why I'm divorcing you. Get out of my house. You're disgusting. You think your wife is just a slave. The best wife is one who acts like a housekeeper. Don't you worry about saying things like that. I hope you regret what you just said one day, I replied. What are you trying to say? I'm not afraid of any threats from a housewife with no job and no parents like you, he laughed. My husband and my mother-in-law laughed together. That's so true. You can't do anything about it because you're just trash. Well, I understand how you feel now. I'm going to move out of this house. I said that and signed the divorce papers then. I left. I put the divorce papers in my bag and started to pack my stuff. My mother-in-law and husband watched me with grins on their faces. Now you're homeless. What on earth are you going to do now? Well, it's none of our business anymore. Good luck, homeless lady. Oh, and Larry, this is a good time for him to get out too. Yeah, let's take out the trash and clean this place up. After we get rid of him, we'll tear down the wall and make it bigger and more comfortable. My husband and mother-in-law were already talking about what they would do after we were kicked out. Then they went to Larry's room and told him to pack up his belongings and leave. I was planning to leave anyway, but I never thought they would kick Larry out too. I kind of regretted letting my emotions take over and having a fight with my husband. I'm sorry, Larry. It's my fault. No, don't worry about it, Larry said. I already realized I can't live with them anymore. Besides, I have other things I'm interested in. Maybe it was lucky we had that fight. He smiled. It seemed like Larry wasn't bothered by leaving, which made me feel a bit better. 5 days later, on Wednesday, when my mother-in-law was out of town, Larry and I called a moving company and moved out. After we finished moving, my mother-in-law called my new place. Don't worry, we have already left. I said, Larry came with you, didn't he? She asked. Yes, we moved out together. I'm glad I don't have to see you guys anymore, she said happily and hung up. But what she didn't know was that Larry and I were planning revenge. I managed to move my belongings and start a new life just in time. Thanks to Larry, I got a lot of money for my husband in the divorce. Larry had recorded what my husband and mother-in-law said during the fight. Their words were considered harassment, which helped prove the divorce was my husband and mother-in-law's fault. I was able to claim a lot of money as revenge on my husband. Larry's friend, a lawyer, helped me get the alimony. My husband was shocked and accepted the payment. I was really grateful for Larry's help and decided not to mention it anymore. A few days later, I got a lot of phone calls from my ex-mother-in-law. It felt like a demon knocking at my door. I realized I had forgotten to block her number, so I had no choice but to answer the phone. Lauren, where are you? She demanded. There's no way I'll tell you that. We're strangers now, I replied. Please don't say that, she begged. I'm calling because where's Larry? She asked. Huh? Why are you asking about Larry? I replied, I'm looking for him, but I can't reach him anymore, she said. That's too bad. Maybe he doesn't like you anymore, I said, trying to provoke her. Then someone else took the phone. Don't be silly. You two moved out together. You must know where he is. You're a bunch of jerks. I did know where Larry was, but I wasn't going to tell them. I'm afraid I don't know. You'll have to find him yourself. I said, where the heck are you anyway? You don't have a home, a job, or a place to live. If you're willing to beg, I might let you come back, but you'd have to be my housekeeper. She said, who's coming back to you? I have a job and a place to live. I'm not going back to you, I replied. That's a lie, she shouted. My ex-husband was surprised because he didn't know I could get everything sorted out so quickly. I didn't bother to correct him. Please don't call me again. If you call me or come near me, I'll call the police, I said, and then hung up the phone. I blocked my mother-in-law's number right away. I had already blocked my ex-husband's number. They were so panicked because they had just realized something important. They thought my father-in-law had left them a lot of money, but it was Larry who had been sending money to his mother's account every month. My mother-in-law thought Larry was just a lazy person with no job. They couldn't believe that the bank had divided my father-in-law's inheritance. When Larry was kicked out of the house, he stopped sending money. That's why there were no more transfers. Heirs at the expected time. They must have finally realized who had been providing the money, but it was too late. Larry had already cut ties with his mother and brother. My ex-husband had no money to pay Alam money, and my ex-mother-in-law was living off the money Larry sent every month. If the money stops coming in, she's going to be in a lot of trouble. Well, they both got what they deserved. I don't feel sorry for them at all. By the way, Larry bought a nice apartment in New York and is living there comfortably. Why is he so rich? Why did he send money to his parents and stay there all those years? It's because he made a promise to his father. Unlike his mother, Larry's father loved him a lot. Even though his mother and brother treated him badly, he stayed because of his father's wish. His father told Larry, "You may not like your mother and brother, but they are important family members to me. So after I pass away, please take care of them too," to keep his promise to his father. Even though he was bullied, Larry secretly sent money to support his mother and brother. It's terrible that his mother and brother, who kicked out such a kind-hearted person like Larry without knowing the truth, are the worst. I met Larry once after we moved out. He said he had made a promise to his father, and I agree with him. I hope he can move on. I was feeling hopeless after being tricked by my husband, but luckily, Larry saved me. I believe he is an important person in my life, and I wish him happiness. 2 years later, Larry asked me to marry him. He proposed to me, but that's another story. It's horrible how a nice person can change so much after getting married. That's a marriage scam, isn't it? I'm glad my brother-in-law is a very reliable person, and now I'm married to him. Anyway, I overcame the obstacles and believe that happiness is finally in my hands. Please let me keep having these happy days. Thank you for watching until the end. Please subscribe to our channel if you liked this. See you in the next video.